Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jürgen Steinmetz, joining you from eTurbo News in Honolulu and our breaking news show. And with us today, like many times before, is Professor Dr. Lipman. He's joining us from Belgium, from Brussels, across the world, and he was in Egypt recently attending COP, the COP climate conference, and has a lot to talk about, I think, because he was involved in a major panel, TPCC, the Tourism Panel on Climate Change, and they now published their first report on aviation. So there's a lot going on. And Geoffrey, welcome. Fill us in.
Thank you, Thomas. Good to see you. I know you just got back from a long trip as
Yes.
well, so you're looking pretty good for someone who's been away for 5 weeks.
Oh,
I
no.
have to say, you thrive on it.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah, I was at the COP, and I am a little more optimistic than most of the commentaries that we've seen in the recent weeks. Um, this is not an easy road to tread, the response to the Code Red climate crisis, and it isn't any less intense as a consequence of having 40,000 people go to Sharm el Sheikh in what I realized for the first time. It's a big trade show. It's a bit like walking around ITB or World Travel Market, but on steroids. There's 40,000 people around. They have events in every pavilion. There's literally hundreds of pavilions, and it's an annual event. So, the organizers of these COPs, and it's not the only one. People talk about COP as though it's the only COP, but there's a biodiversity COP, there's a wetlands COP. COP is just a UN name for Conference of the Parties. And the United Nations deals with issues by having conventions and major agreements, and then sets up processes where the parties come together every year and review the agreement or some aspect of it. And the climate COP, which has been going since 1995, the first one, and it was developed at the Rio Earth Summit in 1992, one of the Morris Strong outputs. This is perhaps the biggest one because it's dealing with the biggest challenge that we have, which is, as you and I have talked before, Thomas, the existential climate crisis, which is creeping into tourism response now. Started last year at the COP with the so-called Glasgow Declaration, and that was an attempt to bring tourism together with these annual bunfests, which are held by the climate people. And it's an interesting thought, in a way, to me anyhow. One of the issues around the tourism and climate interface is that you're dealing with two separate ministries in every government. Tourism, still after 30 years of identifying its major contributions to the economy and to poverty reduction and gender equality and all those things that WTTC and UNWTO publish every year. Still, when you get into most governments, the tourism sector is not one of the senior ministries, whereas the climate sector and the environment sector during this past 30 years since the Rio Earth Summit has become one of the primary government departments in every country. So they've created this annual event, and because they have a target in the climate world, and their target is generally felt to be what they call to achieve Paris 1.5, namely that the temperature of the planet can't heat more than 1.5 degrees above its historical levels. The scientists tell us that, you know, the ideal time for humanity from a planetary viewpoint was before the Industrial Revolution and before we started putting all of the nasty polluting stuff into the atmosphere, the carbon, the nitrous oxide, the methane, the sulfuric oxide. All of this has created this band around the world, and we're heating underneath it. And tourism came to the game basically last year with this Glasgow Declaration. And that's it. It's a very, very tiny piece of the exercise. And I was there with the Sustainable Tourism Global Council from Saudi Arabia, where I'm an envoy for that group. And we had created an initiative, which you referenced, called the TPCC, the Tourism Panel on Climate Change, which is an attempt to do for tourism what the IPCC, which everybody knows about, the science arm of the climate initiative. We thought we should try to do the same thing for the tourism sector. So we launched this here. You kindly covered quite a lot of what we did. And now I'm back, and now we have to get down to work, because our program was a launch in the COP. Well received. We did it in the Saudi Arabian pavilion. They have been a kind of incubator for this panel. The idea is that it will be an independent, objective, analytical science panel. But it's been created and launched by the Saudi center.
How was it perceived outside Saudi Arabia? I mean, was it like a panel, a public panel? Anyone who attended COP could have attended? I have no idea how COP works. You said it's like a trade.
Well, yes, it was open to everybody. We were in. It works. It's very regulated. There's a blue zone, which is for the negotiators, limited number of people. There's a green zone. There's a yellow zone. There's a place where the NGOs congregate. It's quite well structured. But because we were there with the Saudi Arabian government, we had access to everything. And it was a small launch. We had about 100 people. Mostly they were from Saudi Arabia, but there were a number of people who we'd invited specifically. But in a way, that was just a happening. You know, these things have to start somewhere, whether you have a big launch or a small launch. The real work now begins, because we produced basically what we called a foundation document. And again, I think anybody interested in seeing this can download it from our website, which is tpcc.info, tpcc.info. And we kind of identified the fact that we've gathered together 65 now of the leading climate scientists in the tourism field, just like the IPCC gathers climate scientists generally. And this is a process. This isn't a report or a one-time event. This is a continual process forevermore, which is that next year, these 65 climate scientists will, in a disciplined academic fashion, do a stock take of exactly the status of climate in relation to tourism and tourism in relation to climate. And why is this stock take important? Because everybody's producing reports at the moment on how they are going to get to what they call net zero by 2050. You see it from the airlines. There were 13 aviation reports in the last 12 months. 13.
Wow.
All with different metrics, many starting from different baselines, and it's impossible for the average person to get any perception of what is right or what is wrong. So our goal as a science-based, open, transparent group is to collect all this material which is being put out there. A lot of it is being put out by consultants who are looking for business, by PR companies, by media companies, and then by the big organizations, UNWTO, WTTC, in their advocacy role. Well, TPCC is going to step back from this and look at all of them and then produce the following year. The first year, it's just going to stock take. What the hell is happening out there? What are all these reports? Which ones are valid? You know, I read one that was published last week. It was called A Path to 2050. And 2 paragraphs down, the author said, "We know this is unrealistic." I mean, it actually said it's in the report. Well, what's the point of producing a report that is unrealistic, except to show people that you're into this issue? Well, we're not doing it that way. We're going to collect these reports, have these 65 scientists analyze them, have working groups which look at different elements of it, have peer reviews, which is terribly important in the science world, and then the following year, 12 months later, we're going to give our first science assessment of where tourism is in relation to climate change and where climate impacts are in relation to tourism. And then we'll repeat that cycle, this 3-year cycle, we'll repeat it going forward. And you know, I've said this on your breaking news shows before. I won't be here to witness, you know, the response, but my kids will, and my grandkids will, and you know, the more we can do to make it better for them, that's why we're doing this.
And right now, this is funded by the Saudi government. That's why it was in the Saudi pavilion.
Yeah, it's funded by the Sustainable Tourism Global Council. When Gloria Guevara, the ex-president of WTTC, who's now chief advisor to the Minister of Tourism in Saudi Arabia, when she asked 8 people, you know, old people like myself, to get involved in her Sustainable Tourism Global Council, and she asked each one of us to take on a project, and she asked me to actually pull universities together because of work I've been doing in that field. And I called up the best climate scientist I know, Professor Daniel Scott from the University of Toronto, and Professor Susan Beckham from the University of Waterloo in Canada, and then Professor Susan Beckham from Griffith University in Australia. And I said, look, would you like to help in this process? And Daniel said, well, we shouldn't really just pull universities together. That's interesting. But we should do something meaningful, and we should create something like the IPCC for tourism. And that's how it developed. And I went back to Gloria, and we presented a project with a budget. It was approved by the members of this council, the envoys, the members of the centre. And over the past 6 months, Daniel and Suzanne and I have put together this foundation framework and this first framework report, which we released at the COP. And it was funded by Saudi Arabia. They've committed to fund it for at least the first 3 years of the cycle, maybe more. It all depends, and that's how it happened.
Now,
I'm just going to ask you for 1 second, because because my cat has to come in through the window here.
Okay. That's important.
There we go.
All right.
Sorry about that.
No, 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 not a problem. Now, um, of course, your main identity or organization is SunX. So, is there a link between what you're doing in this initiative with SunX Malta?
There is as yet no formal link. I mean, the fact is that you know, I'm doing this, and it's the same area of interest, and I'm rather hopeful that at some stage we'll find some common areas in which to operate. But at the moment, these are two separate initiatives, both trying to do the same thing, both trying to produce a better kind of tourism for a harsher kind of world.
Wow. Now, attending this event in Sharm Sheikh, there was so much publicity on this event everywhere in the world. How would you summarize COP? Was it a success, or was it just another event, or how did you see it?
Well, I think it's both of those. The COPs come every year. They're going to the plan is they come every year between now and 2050. It's a journey, and at the national level, countries have committed under the Paris Agreement to measure their greenhouse gas outputs, to set up a plan to get them to zero, or as they say, net zero. I prefer to say zero greenhouse gas by 2050. And all governments have committed to do this. And every year they send their information into the headquarters, the UN Climate Agency, and then they meet to discuss, have we done enough? Could we do more? What is a potential area for a major breakthrough? And I'm sure you've read that at this COP, the major breakthrough issue was from the developing countries, again, saying that they should be repaid for loss and damage, which comes about from climate disasters, which they have not contributed to, because this blanket around the earth has been made by the industrialized nations, and yet the poorest nations, the developing countries, the small island states who have virtually no greenhouse gases, they're the first to go. The islands in the Pacific are the ones which are disappearing. The countries in Africa are the ones which are having the dreadful droughts. And so each year people come to the COP, they try to find a new consensus on a better approach to responding to climate change. And there are two main areas, Thomas. They have UN language for it. They call it mitigation and adaptation. This is the UN speak. Mitigation means reducing emissions, and adaptation means responding to the impacts of climate change, which are extreme weathers, which are heat waves, which are droughts, which are forest fires, floods, and then the bigger issues, things like melting of the ice sheets, which are happening very quickly in the Arctic and the Antarctic, and which are raising the sea level. So again, the small islands are the ones who would immediately feeling these impacts.
And
And bottom line, I'm sorry, I take a long time to answer your questions, but I hope people at least feel they're getting a proper explanation of things. It's incremental improvement. That's the process, that every year you bring everyone together, and you try to tighten a little bit the response that you're making to a problem which is immense and took a long time for the world to accept as being a real problem, with a lot of lobbying going on to argue that it's no problem, and a lot of countries saying yes, it's a problem, but it's not our problem. And I think we saw this over the last 10, 15 years, particularly with the Paris Agreement, where people said, hey, everybody said, this is a problem. These are the limits that we have to reach from 2015 to 2050. This is targets for 2025, 2030. And we'll meet every year to try to see if we can collectively agree to tighten those targets and to cover ourselves to make sure that we have, you know, people protected to the maximum extent. And from that viewpoint, you know, it was okay. It's finishing at the moment, and I think it's been relatively successful. It may be that this big issue of loss and damage is agreed, or it may be that it's 80% agreed and they'll have to come back next year. And in between that time, negotiations will go on, which is the way the UN system works, hundreds of committees and national level initiatives. And they'll come back in a year's time and they'll push a little closer towards an agreement on this.
Now, when you see COP20 now and the outlook here in our country, in the United States, in possibly after 2024, having another Republican leadership, maybe even under former President Trump. Um, these are all factors. There are still deniers that there is really no climate change. Did you feel any of these tensions, or is the world okay in was it
No,
way of
I mean, I think, you know, 2, 3 years ago, it was felt immensely when Donald Trump pulled the United States out of the Paris Agreement without any reason at all. There was a lot of alarm and a lot of concern. But the US government isn't on it. First of all, it's had former Secretary of State Kerry, who's been constant there. Al Gore, former Vice President, who's been constantly an important part of these gatherings. And the US, whilst it formally moved out at the national level, you know, in Hawaii and across the US, cities, mayors, and governors kept the faith. They stayed in. And then, of course, when President Biden came in and the Democratic um, government, it all changed. And, you know, somebody said the adults are back in the room again. And it's true, you know, and I can say this, I'm not going to talk big politics, but as an observer of politics over the years, the last 2 years has seen the kind of US leadership return into the world that we've been used to. And you know, I'm hopeful that people will not be ridiculous enough to go anywhere near a Trump presidency in 2 years' time. And I'm old enough to be able to say that, you know, I think the man should go to jail for the insurrection that he created and the divisiveness and hatred and indecency that he's brought to society. And to me, it's one of the great it's an advantage and a disadvantage of the American system. The advantage is you have everything out in the public arena. And the disadvantage is you have the most convoluted legal system in the world that somebody can do dreadful things in plain light, as Donald Trump did in fomenting the insurrection, and then use clever legal trickery to to be deceitful about the whole thing and to stay out of jail and to still not show his taxes. He's thinking of running again, and he still hasn't shown his taxes, which he promised everybody he would show.
yeah, I know that.
So I think at the COP there was a feeling that Donald Trump isn't going to come back again, and if he does, the world has a serious problem again.
Yeah, and of course the energy crisis now caused by the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. These are all issues that could also change um, of all these goals for climate change, because if people have to survive and it's freezing cold, yeah, you may have to go back to other energy resources instead of not having any resources. How is there a plan B? Are people talking about it, or how do you see this?
Well, I think there is a plan B. First of all, on the general situation, I think at a global level, people have to find a way to deal with what I would call rogue state initiatives. What Vladimir Putin has done in Ukraine is a rogue state initiative which attacks the entire global system. And unfortunately, because Russia is a member of the Security Council, the UN is not a place where this can be resolved anymore. So they have to start really seriously thinking about how can we deal with this and isolate a country which creates this turmoil and killing of people and shelling of civilian infrastructure. These are war crimes. These are fundamental war crimes. And I think it's very important that we have to be realistic about it. If it's going to get cold in the winter in many countries, people will have to use what fuel is available. And if that means using fossil fuel, they will have to use fossil fuel. Hopefully, there will be a resolution to this war in the next few years, and we can get back onto track again. But it's true what you say. The military has a significant carbon footprint. It's not really discussed or measured. And when you get an intensification, as you're getting in Ukraine, that has a global effect.
Yeah, well, times uh, are really uncertain.
I'm not disappearing. I'm closing the door.
Yeah, and we don't know, I guess, where the world is, but it's definitely a positive development, especially for the travel and tourism industry. And we're definitely going to be following your story and your activities for the time to come, I guess. But no, definitely we're living in uncertain times, but it's a positive development, I understand. And when it comes to travel and tourism, the impact on climate, travel and tourism is there, but is it, how significant is it to the rest?
It's critically significant. I mean, take some examples. You remember when we had the hurricane in the Bahamas and Grenada, we and everything's wiped out. You can't, and the hurricanes are being intensified by the climate. So
Right.
a country which is a tourist country suddenly has no tourism. If you were a tourist operator in Pakistan at this moment, you've just lost a third of your country to floods. So tourism is one of those industries which is likely to be really seriously affected. I mean, we've built the entire patterns of tourism, or they have been built over the last 40, 50 years based on relatively predictable weather.
Yeah, and it's definitely not predictable. It also goes the other way. I just got back from Europe and had a wonderful time in end of October, sitting outside and eating ice cream and
Yeah,
in
but
countries where
you
we
you
should have
had
snow,
floods. You had floods in Germany for the first time of a
Right,
serious level. We
right.
had them here in Belgium. And the climate scientists tell us that these are a direct result of climate change. I like to make it very simple. There's a blanket around the earth, and sun's rays are not escaping as they traditionally did, and that heats everything up. And in the heat, the chemical reactions get more intense, and so you get and it manifests itself through weather. So you get places which had previously had good rainfall get no rainfall, and you get places like Australia last week getting sort of massive half a year's supply of rainfall in a day.
Yeah,
So
no,
these are serious challenges to tourism. I mean, how can you sell tourism product for that kind of a reality?
yeah, I just came back from Marrakesh in Morocco, And the tour guide explained to me that there's just water for another 30 days. The river we crossed, what it supposedly was a river, was completely dry. So yeah, climate change is there. It is a threat to everyone.
South Africa, Thomas, South Africa, with its water supply, we know it has a very limited water supply. Now, will they respond to it? Yes, through technology, through desalination plants. But this costs money to put in place, and it takes time to put in place. It's the same thing. Aviation is a big focal point. Everybody now says sustainable aviation fuel is the answer. And it may well be, but at the moment it's 0.005% of all the fuel that's available. And to get it to the stage where there's sustainable aviation fuel for every flight in every airport is going to take massive amounts of investment, a big commitment by everybody, the airlines, the manufacturers, the engine manufacturers, the fossil fuel companies themselves, and it's going to take years and years and years. So tourism has got to address these issues, otherwise we're just going to find ourselves totally disrupted.
Well, let's continue this conversation as often as we can. It is a very important conversation to have, and I'm glad that Saudi Arabia seems to be stepping up to the plate. So let's hope this serves as a model for other countries to do the same. And Geoffrey, please keep us informed.
Can I just come in on that,
Sure,
Thomas? I have
sure.
to say, I know there's around the world there's a lot of skepticism about Saudi Arabia dealing with these issues. That's a reality. I have gone with an open mind into this. I've been going to Saudi Arabia now for more than 40 years. First going when I was with IATA many years ago. The transformation in the country is in the last year is incredible. The commitment from the very top to use tourism very smartly, I would say, to use tourism as a vehicle is absolute. And what has impressed me the most from the Minister of Energy, I went to an event of the Saudi Green Initiative. Minister of Energy saying very clearly that we will meet our Paris obligations. The head of Aramco, Saudi Aramco, the biggest oil producer in the world, saying the same thing. And the young people, no different from the young people you would find in the streets of Hawaii, the streets of Belgium, smart, bright, um, you know, girls along with boys. There's no seems to be no differentiation. I think Saudi Arabia will be a major player in this transformation, and I think they will transform their economy. They're basically fossil fuel driven at the moment, but they've got boundless solar energy. They're in one of the prime positions for getting sunlight. And if you were on the board of a fossil fuel company now, I'm sure you would be sitting around saying, okay, how can we transform from something which the world is against to something which is going to help save our society, which is renewable energy and solar energy. So I believe Saudi Arabia is a major new positive factor in the game. And I know we'll see each other in Riyadh in 10 days' time at the WTTC meeting. And I think it will become very apparent there just how the transformation's taking place and how committed the whole country is to this to tourism being a lead driver in their whole economic and socio-economic re-emergence.
Yeah, definitely a lot of changes in that part of the world. I've never been to Saudi Arabia, so it'll be a first for me, and I'm looking forward to see Saudi Arabia and, of course, meet you there. and so many other people, because it seems to be the WTTC event in Saudi Arabia. Everyone I talked to said we're going to Saudi Arabia. So let's see how this is. But Geoffrey, this was a very interesting conversation. So let's keep on this subject. And if anything comes up, please reach out. And everyone who's watching us now, if you wanted to see the session again, just stay tuned. We repeat it for the next 24 hours. And after this, of course, you can find it on breakingnews.com and also on our YouTube or Vimeo channels, and listen to it again. We also today just published a press release with the information from COP20, and the release was supplied by the organization Geoffrey is part of. So you can read this, and we definitely follow up. Well, thank you, Geoffrey. And any last word?
No, except to say thank you. I look forward to seeing you in 10 days' time. It's been too long, my friend. And because I missed World Travel Market this year because it was at the same time as the COP meeting. But see you soon, and we'll sit down, and we won't be able to have a beer together, but we can have a coffee together.
The coffee is good. Or in Morocco, I don't know if they have this in Saudi Arabia. I love this mint tea. It's really good.
Well, they have that, and by the way, they have your favorite Starbucks as well.
Wow. No. All right. Okay. I'm ready to go now. Okay. Talk to you soon.
See you soon. Thanks very much for this, Thomas. As always, I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. We appreciate you. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.